A silver storm of cinematic excellence is heading your way, bringing a flood of new perspectives and raw emotions. Brace yourself for the impact of stories that hit like lightning and linger like thunder. Subscribe today and ride the storm of great storytelling with us right now.
The night it finally happened, I was elbow deep in buttercream. That's the thing nobody tells you about owning a bakery. The glamorous part. The ribbon cutting, the 5-star reviews, the regulars who know your name. That's maybe 10% of it. The other 90 is 4 a.m. Alarms, flour in your hair, and standing at a stainless steel counter at 9 on a Friday night finishing a 3-tier wedding cake because your Saturday starts at 6. I wasn't thinking about my family. I hadn't let myself think about them in almost 3 years. I'd gotten pretty good at that, the way you get good at anything you practice long enough. Someone says something, a smell drifts by, a song comes on, and you feel the pull, the little tug at the edge of your chest, and then you just don't follow it. You go back to the buttercream. You pipe the next rosette. You keep moving. My assistant Lena had already gone home. It was just me and the hum of the proofing oven and the low playlist I kept on in the evenings. Something without words, so I could think clearly. The shop was dark out front. The neon closed signed to a faint pink glow across the display case. I remember thinking, 2 more tears and I'm done. That's when I heard the knock. I should tell you about my family first, because without that, none of what comes later makes sense. I grew up in a house where love had conditions attached, even if nobody ever said so out loud. My parents weren't cruel people. They were just people who had decided very early that my older brother, Patrick, was the one who needed protecting, and that I was the one who could handle things on her own. Patrick is 4 years older than me. He's funny, genuinely charming, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it without even trying. He can make anyone laugh. He can also make anyone feel like whatever he needs right now is the most reasonable thing in the world to ask for. Growing up, I watched him borrow money from our parents and never pay it back. I watched him start a landscaping business at 22 and fold it within a year, watched them absorb the loss without a word. I watched him wreck his first car and get another one. I watched him get a third chance at everything, always a third chance, and I watched my parents look at him the way you look at something fragile you're terrified of dropping. I wasn't fragile. Or maybe I was, and they just never noticed. When I was 24, I decided I was going to open a bakery. I'd been working in pastry for 3 years at that point. First at a hotel downtown, then at a small French place that taught me more about precision than any culinary program could have. I'd been saving since I was 19. I had a business plan. I had a location I'd been watching for 2 years, waiting for the lease to turn over. I told my family at Sunday dinner. My mother's first question was, "Do you really think this is the right time?" My father's was, "Have you thought about what happens if it doesn't work?" My brother didn't ask anything. He just said, the restaurant industry is brutal. Most places don't make it 2 years. I thanked them for their input and opened the bakery anyway. That was the beginning of the distance, the first visible crack, though the fault lines had been there longer than I'd known. For the first year, things were hard. I won't pretend they weren't. There were weeks I paid my suppliers before I paid myself. There were months I worked 7 days and the numbers still barely made sense. I called my mother once, during a particularly bad stretch in February, just needing to hear a voice that knew me. She told me I should talk to Patrick, because he'd gone through something similar with his business. His business had lasted 11 months. Mine made it through year 1, then year 2. I hired Lena. I hired 2 part-time weekend staff. I got a write-up in a local food blog that brought in a wave of new customers. I started doing wedding cakes and custom orders, which changed the revenue picture completely. By year 3, I had a waiting list for Saturdays. My family knew none of this, because by then, we'd stopped talking. The break didn't happen all at once. It came the way most things come. Gradually, and then suddenly. There was an argument at Thanksgiving that I won't get into in detail because it would take too long and it would just make me angry to relive. The short version is that Patrick needed money. My parents gave it to him. And when I said something about a loan he'd taken out 2 years earlier that was still sitting unpaid, the room went very quiet. And then my mother said, "Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" I drove home that night. I sat in my car in the parking lot behind my apartment for a long time. I thought about all the ways I could respond. Text, call, wait for an apology that wasn't coming. And then I thought about the buttercream I had to finish by morning and the couple coming in at 10 for a cake tasting. I went upstairs. I went to sleep. I didn't call them again. They didn't call me. 3 years passed. The knock came again, harder this time. I set down my piping bag, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked to the front of the shop. Through the glass door, I could see 2 silhouettes, and even with just the streetlight behind them, I knew immediately. You don't forget the shape of people you spent 20-something years watching across a kitchen table. My father, my mother. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the deadbolt. There was a version of me, the one I'd been before I learned better, who would have opened that door because family is family and you don't let people stand in the cold. I felt her, that version. I felt the old pull, but I also felt something new, a kind of stillness, a steadiness in my chest that hadn't always been there. I'd built something here. This was mine. And whatever they wanted at 9 on a Friday night after 3 years of silence, it wasn't going to be good news. I unlocked the door. My father stepped in first. He looked older, which surprised me even though it shouldn't have. He was wearing the kind of expression I recognized, the one that meant he'd already rehearsed what he was going to say and had decided he was right before he started. My mother touched my arm when she came in, just briefly, like she was checking that I was real. "We need to talk," my father said. I left the lights down in the front of the shop. I didn't offer them coffee. I didn't take off my apron. Those were choices. "About what?" I said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Here's what was in the folder. Patrick, it turned out, had spent the last 2 years attempting to build another business, this time a food truck operation. He'd gotten investors. He'd gotten a commercial kitchen rental agreement. He'd also, at some point 18 months ago, taken out a personal loan from a lender, using as partial collateral a financial reference letter that had my name on it. I hadn't written any letter. My father laid the document on the counter in front of me. I looked at my name. The signature wasn't even close. Anyone who'd seen me write would have known, but it had been notarized, which meant someone had been paid or fooled or both. The food truck business had collapsed 3 months ago. Patrick owed the lender $28,000. The lender was now pursuing collection, and Patrick's investors were threatening their own legal action. My father told me all of this in a voice that was almost steady. Then he told me the other part. Patrick needed me to take on a portion of the debt. Not all of it, just enough to satisfy the lender and get the investors to back off. $20,000. He showed me a figure written on a piece of paper in my brother's handwriting, like that made it official. "He's your brother," my mother said. I looked at the document on my counter. I looked at my father's face. I looked at my mother, who was standing slightly behind him, who had been standing slightly behind him for as long as I could remember. "When did this happen?" I said. "The business? The letter? When did he forge my name?" Nobody answered. "Does he know I know?" I said. My father said he didn't think Patrick understood how serious it had gotten. He said Patrick had made some poor decisions. He said things had spiraled. I picked up the folder and looked at it for a long time. "Leave this with me," I said. "I need to make some calls in the morning." My father said they needed an answer by end of the weekend. My mother said she knew this was a lot to process. My father said that if I wasn't willing to help, they might have to consider other options. There were certain business relationships they could speak to, certain people in the community who knew the bakery. I want to be precise about what he said, because I want you to understand what I understood in that moment. He said, "We know people who work with suppliers in this area. It would be a shame if things got complicated for you." Not a direct threat. The kind of thing a person can walk back if they need to. The kind of thing that is absolutely a threat. I walked them to the door. I said I'd be in touch. I watched them drive away. Then I stood in my empty shop, in the dark, with the folder on the counter, and I thought for a long time. I need to tell you something about the 3 years I'd spent not talking to my family. I hadn't just been making cakes. In the first year after Thanksgiving, I'd gotten a lawyer. Not because I knew something specific was coming, just because I was a woman running a small business alone and someone I trusted told me it was the smartest thing I could do. Her name is Beverly, and she's the kind of person who has seen everything twice and still takes notes. She reviewed my business structure, helped me set up the LLC properly, and told me to keep documentation on anything that touched my personal finances. I did. I was meticulous. I have a folder, a real one, physical, rubber-banded, and labeled for every business year since I opened. Every lease payment, every vendor contract, every invoice paid and outstanding, every loan I'd taken, every loan I'd repaid. When Patrick had borrowed money from me twice, once 4 years ago and once 5, I had the original texts, the transfer records, the verbal acknowledgement he'd given at a family dinner that I'd recorded on my phone because Beverly told me always to document. I also had, as of that October, something else. I'd been contacted by the lender's collection firm 2 weeks earlier. They'd found my name on the reference letter and sent a notice to my business address. I'd sent it immediately to Beverly. She'd looked into it. She'd called me back the same day. "This letter is forged," she said. "This is not your signature. I want you to sit on this information for now. Do not respond to the lender. Do not contact your family. And let me do some digging." That was 13 days before my parents knocked on my door. Beverly had spent those 13 days doing exactly what she said she'd do. By the time my father laid that folder on my counter, I already knew more about the situation than he did. I knew the lender had identified the forgery, but was still attempting to collect on the debt using the letter as leverage. I knew that Patrick's investors were largely friends who hadn't filed anything formal yet. I knew that Beverly had filed a preemptive dispute with the lender on my behalf and had a certified letter documenting the forgery ready to send to the relevant authorities the moment I gave the word. I also knew, because Beverly is thorough, that if my father followed through on the implied threat about suppliers and community contacts, there were protections available to me that he almost certainly didn't know about. I didn't sleep well that night. But it wasn't fear keeping me up. It was something that felt almost like calm. Saturday morning, I called Beverly at 7. I told her about the visit. I told her what my father had said as precisely as I could remember it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to send you something this afternoon. I want you to read it before you respond to them." By 2 o'clock, she'd sent me a letter, addressed to my parents, to Patrick, and to the lenders simultaneously. It detailed the following: that the reference letter bore a forged signature, that I had documented proof of this, that I had made no agreement to take on any debt related to my brother's business, and that any attempt to contact my suppliers, my landlord, or my customers in a manner intended to damage my business would be treated as tortious interference, for which my attorney was prepared to act. It also included, as an attachment, copies of the loan records from 4 years ago and 5 years ago, the money Patrick still owed me, which, with the modest interest Beverly had suggested I apply given the outstanding duration, came to a number just slightly higher than $20,000. I read it twice. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. "I've had a chance to think about what you said," I told him. "Good," he said. His voice was careful, measured. "My attorney sent something to you this morning. I'd suggest reading it before we continue this conversation." There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that I'm aware the letter you showed me is forged. I've been aware for 2 weeks. My attorney has already filed a dispute with the lender. If Patrick wants to address that in a way that doesn't involve law enforcement, he has about 72 hours to contact Beverly's office directly." Another pause. "Longer. We're not trying to involve lawyers. I know you're not," I said. "That was your preference, not mine." I let that sit for a moment. "The other thing," I continued, "is that the money Patrick owes me, and I have all the documentation, every transfer, the acknowledgement he gave at dinner in March, the texts, comes to just over $22,000. If you would like to discuss offsetting the lender debt against what he already owes me, that conversation can happen through Beverly." My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You've been planning this." "I've been protecting myself," I said. "That's different." I wasn't angry when I said it. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect a moment like this to feel triumphant, like a movie, like the music swells. It didn't feel like that. It felt like I was just tired. Tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. The kind of tired that comes from spending years feeling invisible to people who were supposed to see you. "Patrick made his choices," I said. "I'm not responsible for them. And if anyone contacts my suppliers, my landlord, or anyone connected to my business, Beverly will treat it as what it is." I hung up. I went back to the bakery. There was a birthday cake due at 4. A dozen almond croissants for a standing Sunday order. 2 consultation calls booked for the following week, a corporate account I'd been cultivating for 3 months that had just sent a signed agreement. Lena came in at noon. She could tell something was off. She always can. But she didn't ask. She just put on the playlist we use on Saturdays and started on the croissants. and the shop filled with the smell of butter and warm dough, and for a while I just worked. This is what I want you to understand about that afternoon. I was not waiting for them to call back. I was not refreshing anything, not checking my phone, not rehearsing what I would say next. I was making a birthday cake, a 3-tier vanilla bean with lemon curd filling and a fondant design the customer had sketched on a napkin at our consultation, a little girl in rain boots standing in a garden. That is what I had built. This was what no one could take. My father called Beverly's office Monday morning. Patrick, according to Beverly, didn't call at all, but a letter arrived Wednesday via his own attorney acknowledging the loan amounts and proposing a repayment schedule. The lender, once Beverly's dispute was formally filed and the forgery documentation submitted, withdrew the collection notice against me within 10 days. The investors, as far as I know, have not taken any formal action. My parents have not called me again. I don't know how to feel about that, if I'm being honest. There's a part of me that expected to feel relieved or vindicated or even sad, and I feel some of each, depending on the day, depending on what I'm doing when my mind wanders to it. I feel the absence of them the way you feel a tooth that's been pulled, the space where something was, the faint ache that flares sometimes when you're not paying attention, the fact that eventually you just learn to chew differently. I'm not waiting for an apology. I think I stopped waiting for that a long time before any of this happened. What I have is this: a bakery I built without anyone's help, a Saturday waiting list, a lawyer who answers her phone on weekends, documentation going back 6 years, and the knowledge, quiet and solid and not going anywhere, that when it came down to it, I was ready. I am not a person who needed to be protected. I am a person who built something real, who kept records, who paid attention, who did not let herself be leveraged. That is the story. That's all it was. I went back to the buttercream. I piped the next rosette. I kept moving. I've thought about this a lot since everything settled, what actually happened, and why it ended the way it did. The easy version is that I won because I had a good lawyer and good documentation. And that's true. Beverly did her job and I kept my records and the math worked out in my favor. But I don't think that's really the lesson. I think if I'd only had Beverly and the folder and nothing else, it wouldn't have been enough. What actually protected me was the 3 years before that night, not the silence. I don't think going quiet is inherently wise or noble. But what I did inside that silence, I built something real. I paid attention to the parts of my life I could control. I hired Lena. I cultivated accounts. I took Beverly's advice seriously when she gave it, even when it felt like overkill. Even when I thought, who is actually coming after me? I kept records because she told me to, and because some part of me had learned, slowly, painfully, over years of watching Patrick get away with things, that the people who are most likely to need something from you are also the ones least likely to tell you in advance. That's the thing about consequences. They don't always arrive on schedule. Sometimes they take years. Patrick forged my signature and nothing happened to him for 18 months. My father made an implied threat in my own shop and walked out thinking it had landed. There's a window where it looks like the people who cut corners are just winning, like the rules don't apply to them, like everyone around them is absorbing the cost while they float above it. But the window closes. It always closes. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical sense. I don't think that. I think it closes because the choices we make accumulate. Every time Patrick took the easy way out, he was also not building anything. Every shortcut was also a thing he didn't learn. Every debt someone else absorbed was also a skill he never developed. By the time he forged my name, he was a person who had no tools left, just the same move he'd always made, one more time, pointed at the person in the family who'd actually built something. And I was ready. Not because I knew he was coming, but because I had lived in a way that prepared me for it anyway. I think about that when I'm in the bakery early in the morning, before anyone else is in. The quiet, the flour, the particular smell of the ovens warming up. I built this without anyone's help, and I almost lost it to someone who hadn't built anything at all. The gap between those two outcomes was Beverly's number in my phone, and 6 years of records in a rubber-banded folder, and the decision I made once to not let myself be leveraged by people who counted on me being too loyal to push back. Lena asked me once, a few months after all of it was over, if I missed my family. I told her I missed the idea of them. The version where they saw me clearly and that was enough. That version never existed, maybe. Or maybe it did once a long time ago and I just couldn't find my way back to it. Either way, I'd stopped looking. What I have instead is this, a real thing. A thing that required me to be honest and careful and willing to be uncomfortable and willing to show up when it was hard. A thing nobody forged their way into. That's enough. Some days, it's more than enough.